And all right, so again, thank you and welcome for joining us with this very special program tonight with Janelle McCoy, all the way from Oregon, which is very cool. Janelle McCoy is the executive director for the Friends of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah, and I hope I said that right. You can correct me later. In Eugene, Oregon, and has led a number of other nonprofit organizations in Philadelphia. Empowered by a life-changing stint at a new Cowgirl Camp during the summer of 2019, she now also raises a small crew of goats for fiber. So her resume and her bio is so much longer than all of that, and she'll tell you a little bit about that. She's a really awesome lady, and I'm super excited to have her here tonight. So we can all give a silent clap to Janelle McCoy. Thank you, Janelle, for joining us.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for having me. And wow, if I knew that I could just kind of like host a party like this without having to buy all the booze, then I would have done this a long time ago. This feels like a reunion of sorts. I'm seeing a lot of names, you know, that span a lifetime, and then obviously some new folks too that I don't know that are probably there in your community there, Julia. And so it's a real privilege to be talking to people from all over walks of life for me and for you. So I really appreciate the privilege and the honor. So thank you very much. And so yes, this has been an interesting journey. I think that we will probably start by sharing my screen, but I believe you'll see me on the right-hand side as I'm talking. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen with you and get to our talk today. Here we go. So the like the two faces of Eve or something, I guess. So, you know, it has been an interesting journey. You know, on the one side, you know, one side of my brain, I guess, I am an executive director for a nonprofit here in Oregon, in Eugene, Oregon, for the Friends of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But my side gig of sorts, or you know, kind of where my heart has always been, is in the outdoors. And that's why also I do that professionally now, as well as when I get home. And you can see my, I titled this picture when I took it Ladies Night, because it was just me and the girls hanging out on a Friday night. I can't remember where Derek was. I probably scared him away with a vacuum cleaner or something like that. But so we're gonna start this journey into fiber farming, the seemingly most unlikely journey for me. The only thing more unlikely was the fact that I am and continue to be a classical mezzo-soprano. And considering where I'm from, you know, that is about as unlikely as it could ever be, I think. So yes, I consider myself to be a shepherdess of people and animals. And when I say that, you know, it took me a while to come up with that kind of tagline, because, you know, I was trying to figure out what is the through line here? What is the through line with, you know, the goats and the nonprofits that I've run and that I've been in the arts? And, you know, in every step along the way, I feel like there's been some kind of component of that journey where I'm probably shepherding of sorts, or, you know, organizing something or getting something together or holding it together, or what have you. So I finally decided that I was just a shepherd of people and animals, people and things, people and animals. And so you know, I realize now that my line here actually points to Santa. That is not me. That's me, different hair color, but that is my prerogative. But I'm standing beside Santa after a Pops concert. They're probably about 10 or so years ago. I don't actually remember what year that was. But yes, I am currently the executive director of the Friends of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah. Buford Park and Mount Pisgah, or the Howard Buford Recreation Area, as we call it in formal parlance here, is the second largest regional county park or regional park here in the state of Oregon. It has over 2,400 acres in the park, and it is a natural habitat area, habitat wilderness. The only one larger would be Forest Park, up towards Portland. And with great acreage comes great responsibility, I think. And not only is that's the acreage within the park, but there's a lot of acreage undeveloped around the park as well that we do a lot of work on too, about an additional, I would say, 1,500 acres. And then that is on one side, there's about a third of that is also surrounded by some beautiful farms here. But on the other two sides is the city of Springfield, just like you see in The Simpsons, the city of Springfield, which has about, I want to say 50,000, I'm thinking, people. And then Eugene has over 175,000, approaching 180,000. So you can see just in our, kind of local area here, just between the two municipalities and Pleasant Hill, we've got 250,000 people. So for us to have this very natural area here is of major importance, and we will get to that. Like I said, I'm also a lifelong musician. I am a mezzo-soprano, and mezzo means kind of medium. So it means that I'm not, my voice is not necessarily as high as the sopranos or as low as contraltos. I'm just kind of a salt of the earth, middle person. I was a middle kid, so I'm also a middle voice. So I think those two may be related. And there also was a theme in my life, I think you can see here. As a kid, that's my younger sister. I have two older siblings as well. There's this puppy, that was Princess Juliet. And then later on at Cowgirl Camp, there's another dog that looks a lot like Juliet that when we were there at Cowgirl Camp learning how to use border collies for herding. So I also consider myself a fiber farmer now, and I've called myself, my operation, Wether Girl Farm. That's not a misspelling. Wether without an A is a male goat that's no longer intact, so he cannot reproduce, and that is how you spell that. So I like the kind of play on words there. And as I said, in terms of animal husbandry, I am a super lifelong sucker for strays. And that just really is a common theme in life, I think. And whence I came, I was going to say from whence I came, and then I looked it up and I realized that from and whence mean the same thing. So that's actually redundant. So I grew up in a really small southern town of, somewhere between 500 and 600 people, right there on the edge of the mountains before you're getting into the Appalachian Mountains, but right there on the edge. And where I grew up is, the primary industries of the time were really cotton, tobacco, and the textile mills. And, that was back then, and I won't tell you how many years that is because Southern ladies never reveal their ages. But it was, and that kind of area now has really been decimated with mills leaving our towns. Obviously, tobacco has its own inherent problems, and cotton has a more global competition these days. So it is a really hard place for it to just retain its talent. And retain those who grow up there. So it's a very difficult time for these towns now, and has been, since the NAFTA agreement was signed. So, I think that somewhere in my abbreviated description of this program, I said that I had one goal, and that was to get out of town. And that's certainly not a disparagement of where I came from, but it does lack opportunities. And I do think too, as I've ruminated about this over the years, I think that, there was a certain time in our lives where, whether it's, through the Industrial Revolution, and there was this impetus on education, obviously, and maybe the push to get off the farm. My grandfather was a sharecropper. My father, during the Depression, would pick potatoes just for a little extra pocket change, or just pocket change, nothing extra about it. Grew up very poor. And I know my grandmother also grew up on a dairy farm, but at some point, those values switched, and I think it was, as a middle class was trying to develop in our country, people thought you really needed to disconnect from the land, get an education, get a better paying job with a pension, for example. And so, it was never, I never considered agriculture as a career. I didn't know it could be a career, quite frankly. And I think that perhaps had I been male, that might have been somewhat different, but in that I was female, that definitely was not not going to be encouraged for me, unless I would marry someone who would have been a farmer or working at the mill or something like that. Those were, I think probably the aspirations that were planned for me, but I had other plans. So when I went to college, I majored in, I'll say most things, meaning I switched my major around a lot. My first major was actually in chemistry, and that was probably some of my dad's influence. He was a pharmacist. My mom was a lover of word, and particularly was a grammarian, which I'm thankful for, because I, growing up in that part of the country, I probably didn't hear proper grammar, as they would say, very often, unless it was from my mom. And then I also majored in American history, and that was kind of a random influence. I can't really explain that one. But I eventually found my way into the performing arts, and I have often said the dark arts pulled me in a way. And one could say, I guess if I were sitting in the analyst chair or the couch and she was sitting in the chair, maybe that's because I needed to express myself. It was definitely an outlet for being heard. I wasn't heard very often, having grown up in the South and being a female. Creativity, it was a way for me to use my creative self and really think outside the box. And so in that way, it was a bit of a rebellion, I think, because I in chemistry, you're very formulaic. And while I am very attuned to formulas, this pushes me to use the other side of my brain, which is a more creative side. And then I can be collaborative too. And I think in order to survive a household of 4 kids and 2 parents in a ridiculously small house, you probably had to collaborate a little bit. So that maybe makes sense, or just my explanation today of how I landed in the arts, and particularly, how I ended up being opera versus the Grand Ole Opry, which is, or Dollywood. I can't remember if they had Dollywood back then, but that is just by chance, I think. But along the way, as I was saying, something got left behind. I think that push away from the land was something that got left behind, in that I changed my major so often. Jack of all trades, maybe master of none. I did graduate eventually. I was also putting myself through school for part of that time. I worked in a lot of .coms, being that formulaic brain, that was pretty easy for me. And while finishing a music degree, then I performed around the world, and I had the privilege and honor of singing opera and chamber music, oratorio, and pops. And then at one point, I say that I left my nose behind. That'd be on Piedmont Road in Atlanta near the Botanical Garden. I was in a head-on collision, and I really screwed up my face. Luckily, it was mostly internal. Well, I don't know if that's lucky or not. It was mostly all internal damage. I didn't have a lot of cuts from that, but I did have a lot of bones that were broken inside my face. My nose was just decimated. So that had to be kind of pieced back together. And because I didn't learn my lesson that time, I even tried to go back to singing after that major car accident, even without feeling in my face for a long time, which is really the very hard to do when you're a singer. You really rely on those resonators. So it was, just trying to memorize muscle, or just remember muscle memory at that time. And then, because I didn't learn my lesson, life dealt me a, kind of an interesting card, and I was diagnosed with cancer a few years later. And before Obamacare, we didn't really have insurance for pre-existing conditions. So as a single payer, so I had to really think and prioritize my health. And also, it wasn't as if I wasn't already in administration at some points, even in a creative career. I was also building websites when I wasn't performing, or when I was busy learning music or giving my voice some rest. And so then I just decided to switch careers and make the majority of my income be on the administrative side of the arts, and my less than income, my vacation availability is when I got to perform, or when I could balance the two, which was not always easy, as I would say. But, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I always like to say, you can try to take the girl out of the country, but you cannot take the country out of the girl. So even though, you know, the opera is a very glamorous world, and classical music can be very glamorous, and you meet amazing people along the way and have amazing collaborations, you know, through it all. Even when I was trying to figure out what next steps were, it was always the outdoors that was calling me. I ran cross country for part of high school, not to any great acclaim. I could never claim that. It was more because they needed a fifth girl and I needed a sport. But nonetheless, it did give me a love for running, as pretty rugged trails. And then also I grew up near a very wooded area, you know, so I was usually out and about and in the woods when kids were allowed to free range in small towns. That's where you would find me. And that stayed with me wherever I have been. I've always sought the trail, a park, you know, some kind of wooded experience. Now it's more Nordic skiing, even during the winter. Just always wanting to be outside and in nature. So I found myself at a crossroads about a year ago. I had been working at the University of Oregon, and due to budget cuts was laid off from that position. And I thought, well, I am at the age that I'm at, and I recognize that, and I really need to figure out what it is that I want to be when I grow up. And I thought that I knew that, and I think a lot of us think that we know that sometimes. And so I took a little time to try to figure that out. So I went on an artist retreat. I did a workshop with Meredith Monk there at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And I also did what they call, actually this whole experience was more of the radical sabbatical, but I also went to Mexico to volunteer for refugee aid, supporting them and helping families who needed to or wanted to cross the border for a variety of reasons. And then the last part of my journey on my radical sabbatical was there at the Roots of Resilience New Cowgirl Camp in Eastern Washington. And I just call that, you know, this whole journey of mine, kind of a reclamation of roots. You know, it was like recognizing that where I grew up was worth holding on to. And that may sound very funny, but I think that for those of us that are from really small places and very rural places, I think that we have this pressure in a sense to, you know, make ourselves better or to try to compete on a standard, an artificial standard of what may exist in an urban area and those values, because you do feel like you're looked down upon. I remember sitting in my SATs and reading about, they try to watch for this now, back then, you know, I was reading about narratives and situations that I never had experienced. You know, they were very urban in focus and they didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so, you know, I think that you find that there's a predisposition in your experiences, whether you're seeing it on TV or you're seeing it, you know, on an SAT test, that your experiences are not worthy or honored. And, you know, it's taken a long time to understand that the music that I grew up with, the folk music that I grew up with, that the things that I was hearing were just as valuable as the Western European music that I ended up studying. You know, and again, that probably sounds obvious, but it really was not obvious to me. You know, I ended up studying many languages, both technical languages as well as foreign languages. I ended up studying a lot of different subjects. And I think that, you know, maybe subconsciously along the way, it was to kind of make up for that background or what I thought was lacking at least. But then when I came to Cowgirl Camp, it was this, I actually read an article in the New York Times, January of 2019, about women taking over ranches. because there were many ranchers that were aging out, and if they had daughters and they didn't want to sell it outside the family, but there was no one else to give it to, then they were having to accept the fact and rethink, that women could do hard jobs like ranching. Of course we could do hard jobs. We do hard jobs all the time. But that was kind of a new one for some to kind of reckon with, I would suppose. So when I read about that, I thought, I've had this inkling that I want to be reconnected with the land somehow. And I want to explore this. I want to see, is this just nostalgia? Is this just wishful thinking? How would it resonate to me if I do this intensive workshop? There in Eastern Washington, I'm working with cattle and sheepdogs, or sheep and dogs as well. Dogs in a different sense, dogs as a tool as opposed to, my pets or companions rather. So Cowgirl Camp, the Cowgirl Camp experience. I want to share this picture. This is Beth Robinette. I don't know if she ended up logging on, but she is a 4th generation rancher. And I love that she's holding this cow heart right here. And her shirt actually says, "Radical softness is a boundless form of resistance." You gotta hand it to Beth. She's a funny lady, very inspiring. So I wanted to just throw that image in. This was day 1 of Cowgirl Camp. Seeing the cow heart right there. It had been beating not long before that, and Beth is a bit fearless, and that was a pretty interesting moment when we all saw that. It got real quiet. While my employees at the time had accused me of being, akin to city slickers in the movie, I assured them, because I had, despite them, thinking otherwise, despite the fact I was in classical music, I did have a very rural upbringing, so I do not think I was a city slicker. And what I found refreshing, and why other reasons why I was so attracted to Cowgirl Camp, was it really was for women. It was for women who needed to question, and you can ask anything. You can ask anything. You didn't have to be afraid that you didn't know the answer here, because the experiences that were around me, many women in the room were telling me, yes, they might have grown up on the farm or the ranch, but they weren't viewed as the likely inheritant of that farm or ranch. So dad kind of, and brothers often left them out of the loop on the more technical aspects of farming or ranching. They didn't know how to do intensive grazing or rotational grazing. They didn't know the crop rotations. And so they wanted to come to a place where their questions wouldn't be shut down and they could ask whatever they want. And it was a very free environment to ask that without ridicule. And that was a blessing, so that you could really ask these questions and question yourself and your intention. It was led by 2 women, Sandra Matheson, who is a retired veterinarian and has her own farm up towards the Canadian border in Bellevue, Washington, and Beth Robinette, who I mentioned. She's a 4th generation rancher. And also the unique thing about these 2 women, not only was it kind of a multi-generational approach to farming, in that Sandy was so early in this regenerative movement, along with Beth's dad. They were the early folks in what we call regenerative agriculture. So that's agriculture that really is thinking about the health of the land and the biomass of the land, and thinking of the land as a crop as well, not just letting your cattle free graze, but it's not containing them in a way that is perilous to the livestock, whether that's cattle or other livestock. In fact, it's really being very intentional about that grazing pattern to work the land in very intensely but quick sessions. And you'll find that in so doing, that it acts like a tiller. So instead of tilling the land with heavy equipment and really leaching out those minerals and not doing that land any favors, livestock naturally till the land. It was only recently that we lost all of our buffalo. here in this country, or a lot of our buffalo. And the buffalo used to roam the land and do that for us. But when we started putting up fencing and when we decimated that herd in order to forcibly remove Native and indigenous Americans, then we lost that. And that honestly is part of the reason why the Dust Bowl happened. But so this is a practice where you're actually rejuvenating the grasslands and the land. And again, like I said, thinking of that as a crop as well. And they started this program to encourage women to take over farms as opposed to selling out these farms, these family farms, to commercial producers that don't hold these values. They want to encourage women to step up and lean in, and whether it's your own family's farm or whether it's helping out ranchers or farmers who maybe don't have that individual within their families, but they need somebody to take this over because they've spent their lives or their several generations on this farm. It was an instant camaraderie, and it felt very good to be a part of Cowgirl Camp. Here we have, and I even had to crop this a little bit to fit, just a part of the people in that picture. But it was just, it was such an empowering feeling to be around women from many different walks of life. We actually even had a nursing mom there, and she was there with her, I believe she was about 8 months old or 9 months old at the time. And we had a beautiful woman from PR. We had someone from I'm just looking at everybody's face trying to remember, but we had, or one woman worked on the Mars rover project. It was really quite remarkable. I felt like, given our individual skill sets, we could probably conquer the world, quite frankly. This is Brittany Cole Bush. She is someone who was very inspiring to me. She lives down in California, Southern California, and her enterprise in Southern California was one that I am trying to model in my own way. She's using her sheep and livestock to cut down on the brush, the flammable brush that is in the green spaces or not so green spaces in California, so that there are fewer wildfires. And so that was incredibly interesting to me. And so you'll see later when I talk about wanting to model that. And there's Beth, who always is laughing, which I love. She makes me laugh. And being in that safe environment where we could ask anything, where we had that camaraderie, we gained a lot of confidence. We learned how to look at soil in a completely different way. Growing up in the South in a very rural area, you'd think I would know how to look at soil. And I thought I knew how to look at soil. I thought that I could see grass, but the world just really opened up to me when I understood what I was looking at in a way that is so hard to describe. If I see a bare patch, now I know why it's bare. I know how to fix it. I know how to rest it. I know what the underlying causes might be. You might know some of that anecdotally or somewhat intuitively, but now you really know, and you know how to measure improvement, and you know how to look and see, how many inches of sod do you have? How deep are the roots growing? What is your water saturation, or how much water can it hold, which is a very important question. We learned, like I said, we got to watch herding dogs as well, and learn how to work with some of them. It really was a place where you felt like, yeah, I can do this. I can be this, and this feels right. It feels righter than right. It feels like, I probably should have been doing this all along if I had known. But I think that we also go through journeys for particular reasons, and I'm just happy I found where I think I belong as well. And it really is, just harkening back to their approach, this aspect of regenerative agriculture. You can see here, this is on one side a farm who is doing regenerative practices. That means being very intentional about how quickly they graze, how intensively they graze. They're also investing in cover crops. You can tell from that. And this is the other side. This is what we call one of those fence line pictures. It is not doctored. You know, this is actually, let me take that back. This was, no, this is a fence line picture. So this is where you're looking at your neighbor's farm and you're seeing they're not following that practice. And it is decidedly less green. And this picture, like I said, it is a fence line photo. So you are looking across the fence line and just seeing the difference in this practice. I was going to show you another picture, but so also to think about, one of the pictures I had up was showing you one farm's in 2 years how much greener it became. There was a rancher that told us the story at a convention recently in New Mexico, who said that, and I believe he was in maybe Minnesota, where they were having those torrential downpours as they've had in the last few years. And because he had been doing regenerative practices for a few years, even though they experienced, we're talking, 8 inches of rain in a very short period of time, his neighbor was totally flooded out. He was not saturated because his sod had grown to be so healthy, because the roots had become so deep, it absorbed every single bit of that water, and he did not lose his topsoil because of that, whereas his neighbor was not so lucky. And it really was like a light bulb to me. Made me think about, if we could encourage everybody to do that in their own backyards, whether you're here in the Willamette Valley or you're, in those tributaries for the Mississippi River, whether you're the Ohio River Valley or wherever you are, if every farm did that, if every backyard did that, just imagine how much healthier this earth would be, how much more carbon we could sequester, how much more fire resistant we could be, because we simply know how to treat our land like a crop and bring it to health. So that sent me on a path as soon as I got home to, Derek and I, my spouse, we quickly closed on a house by happenstance, really within days of me getting back. There was a house that my spouse had been looking at for years here in Oregon, suddenly came on market, and it has some land attached to it, not a ton, but enough, and outside what we call our urban growth boundary here in Oregon, so that I could have some animals. And I think Derek probably thought I was kidding, or maybe not serious, but I was quite serious. You can see this is a drone shot of our land. It's a little over 3 acres. So that means I can have somewhere between 15 and 20 animals, because it's based on the number of acres you have plus what's left over. So far, so this is our land right here. This is a very, very heavy slope. This was taken probably at the end of fall, I think, because I'm not really seeing a ton of deciduous trees. It looks like they've lost their leaves. But this, I know you can't tell this is a really heavy slope, but let me tell you, this is overrun by blackberries. And for my folks from the East Coast, you have never seen blackberries like we have here in Oregon. For my Oregon friends who are logged in, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about the Himalayan blackberries. As a kid in the South, I loved blackberries. My mom would make blackberry cobbler, and believe me, I loved eating every bit of that. But these blackberries, for my Southern friends, they grow like kudzu. I swear, they can grow like 6 inches in a day. I've never seen anything like it. They hurt, they are painful, they are thick, they are so thick. And it was overgrown. Let's take that, it's still overgrown. And so I wanted to think about these invasive blackberries. These are non-native plants. They are so invasive, they just drain your soil of nutrition. Our land does not, apart from this, which is actually a decent little spot of land right there. This is the house right here. It oddly has, it's a mid-century modern house. It has 2 garages for some reason. And then our land swings all the way to this tree line right there and goes all the way out to like right around there. And we are up in elevation, so we have some very interesting qualities to the land. This is rocky over here. The soil is clay, not like southern clay, but like clay around here is not orange. It's a different color. It's very light. So not like I had in the South, and not with a ton of mica either. But it's sandy, silty clay, and it hardens. I mean, it's pretty amazing what happens. So I figured if I can change these 2+ horrible acres right here, that this whole area knows is just like the previous owner, for whatever reason, didn't have the capacity to take care of it, or didn't care, or I'm not sure. It is like, it's the calling card. So just imagine if I can take care of that and regenerate that over the next couple of years, then I am golden. I can teach others how to do the same thing in their own backyards. So this is putting me on a path, right? For my urban friends who have no idea what this is the T-post. This is how you build your fence. So I built a fence using T-posts. I used 6-foot T-posts. So there's one end, this is the top right here. The other end looks like an arrow, so you can put it in the ground. And I did this whole circumference right here, which is more than 2 acres of T-posts, me pounding those suckers in myself. Not because my spouse didn't want to, but admittedly, I would not let him. He has carpal tunnel and uses his hands and wrists a lot for work. So that wasn't a good thing for him to do. So I didn't let him do it. And so that was back-breaking work, but it was very empowering to do it too, because I wasn't sure if I could do it, but it was slow for me to do it. Others could have done it a lot faster. I'm nowhere near tall enough to do that without a step stool. So if you can imagine each one of those T-posts set apart by about, 6 feet or, 7 feet maybe. And I'm pounding each one of those with a, one of those things that you have to put over your head and just pound away. There for a little arm, I had killer arms. I need to get back at it. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about what I call Wether Girl Farm. So again, my inspiration is that this is a regenerative agriculture practice. I want to do this because I also want to do my part in sequestering carbon. I think that's an untapped resource. We hear talks about cap and trade, and we normally think of that in terms of forestry and boards of wood, or carbon that is stored in trees, and that is true. But really, our largest crop is the soil beneath our feet. And over the last 3+ years, I've come to the realization that we can't rely on others to do this, or our governments to mandate that we do this. We need to do this. All of us need to do this and take care of the earth that we have. And if I can do that in some small way, then that's what I want to do. I am beholden to this gorgeous earth that has been given to me. I'm a shepherd of the earth as well as people and animals. So carbon sequestration, I need to manage those weeds out there. I've even got a tiny bit of tansy growing, which is a bad word here in Oregon. It'll kill livestock. So I've got to fix that, and my sheep can help me with that. Actually, they can eat minimal amounts of tansy and be okay, whereas if a horse eats tansy, it will kill them. So I need to help my neighbors too, and make sure that we're not spreading tansy. My concept, part of what I learned about in Cowgirl Camp, is this new way of thinking about agriculture isn't just about the direct product that you're working on. So say, for example, if you have cattle, you might just be thinking about that in terms of dairy, or in terms of maybe meat production. But you could also be thinking about their hides. There are other ways to make sure that every single ounce of that animal is being used. And I'll show you what I mean by stacking product channels in a second. But I use small livestock. I wanted to have an animal, since I didn't have a lot of land, I wanted to have a certain density of animals for it to make sense for me. And I also wanted animals that I could control, somewhat, as opposed to a massive cow that weighs many more times than what I weigh. And I wanted to think about ruminants or small livestock that the nutrition from their byproducts would help restore the earth that I'm on, because I have very poor soil here. My target market, in that I do consider myself a fiber farmer, Among many possible target markets, for example, knitters, spinners, people who are interested in craft, green entities may be interested in my practice, that I am thinking towards regenerative agriculture. I also think, like I said, cap and trade is going to be a big opportunity if we can just figure out how to accurately measure carbon sequestration. I think that, like I learned from one of my colleagues in Cowgirl Camp, municipalities or counties would love the fact that goats could, or sheep could work on their little dried up islands, in the middle of a roadway, or even parks. Yeah, and they can work during the summer. They're not going to cast off a spark that might cause wildfire. And that's a great way to reduce your fuels that are on the soil. For many, many years, after we removed indigenous people and practices from their land, we suppressed fire and didn't realize the damage that we were doing by having so much fuel on the ground. That was just very kind of arrogant on our part to have not learned the indigenous practices, or even not taking the land to begin with, but nonetheless, so it's really getting back to that practice, and like I said, reducing the fuel on the land. And I do think that part of my market would be landowners. I can see my flock going out and chewing up brush like I'm doing on my property and getting rid of invasives. And I think that is a great marketing tool. And so here's what I want to take you through in terms of product channels. I'm just going to start with the mohair. So I have a small flock of goats right now. I have females, but I'm soon to be adding males and maybe one more female. So even though these are called Angora goats, it's really kind of a misnomer. They are called Angora goats because they were from Ankara, Turkey, or what used to be known as Angora, Turkey. But their fur or their hair is called mohair. It's not the same as Angora rabbits. So let's just take the goats, for example. So raw mohair fiber per pound, this price varies, but if it's a first year fiber, like a kid, that's $35 a pound. If it's a yearling, that means a goat that's about a year old, $25 a pound. Fine adult pound or mohair would be $18 a pound, and a more mature adult is $11 a pound. The reason why it goes down in price is, just like our hair, when we're children, we have very fine hair, and as we get older, our hair, even if you have hair, but our hair becomes different as we get older, and it's not as super fine as it was when we were children. If you wash the mohair, that goes up. So I could sell that raw mohair, by the pound, and get $35, for a baby. But if I just put a little bit more effort into it and learned how to wash that mohair, then that goes up $10 a pound. If I picked through it, or dyed it, that would go up another $10. If I learned how to spin it and sold it maybe on Etsy or some other direct channel, then that adds up to being $6 per ounce, or $24 per skein, as they say, $76 per pound. And that would be $912 per goat. And fleece weighs 2 to 4 pounds. A yearling can weigh 5 to 8 pounds, and fine adults, can also weigh 5 to 8 pounds. I think I am probably running out of time, so I'm gonna flash through these last few slides and open it up to questions. So you can see how this can start to add up. So I'm showing you some of our concept drawings for our goat sheds. My spouse is an architect, so he's, this is kind of the shape of our house, the way that it is, the way that it peers over the valley here. And so he thought he would suggest something that mimics the architecture of our house. And so we're going to be building these this summer, and we'll see what happens. I threw this one in because I'm also interested in rabbits. This is not a fake photo. This is really how big Angora rabbits can be. This is not necessarily a small lady. Maybe she's my height, which granted I'm not that tall, but this rabbit probably weighs might weigh close to 40 pounds or 35 pounder. This is called an Angora rabbit. It's a giant Angora rabbit. That's when you cross an Angora. Right now I have a handful of French Angora rabbits, babies that I just got recently. And you cross them with a giant breed, like giant Flemish or New Zealand, which are meat rabbits. And then you get the size and the quality. This is me doing research. These are, photos that I had put in here from my friend Diane Benjamin, and I think that she might have logged on. So Diane, thank you for those photos. She helped me look at those goats that day. And this is bringing the dream to life. This is, you can see how many invasives we have on our property. Pretty sad, but they're not going to lack for food for a very long time. But we're surrounded by nature here. This is my baby sheep, my lammy that I got recently. He's a Gotland. I spent the first night with him because I, can't say no to stray animals, it seems. These are my female goats. This is Gracie, Indigo Ivy. Gracie can be mean. I call them goats gone wild. They are behind the fence. They are not running through town. I promise that is not me in those viral videos that you've been seeing. That's not my herd. But they're a lot of fun. So I just wanted to push these images of my children on you. And I also work at, as I said, Friends of Buford Park in Mount Pisgah, which is a large park here. I'm the executive director, and we specialize in the native flora and fauna. We provide recreation space that is in a natural habitat, and we have a multitude of volunteers as well. And I'm really blessed to be able to have that job in nature as well as my little flock here at my house. And like I said, this is one of my latest additions, the Gotland lamb, and this is one of my French Angora rabbits as well. And so I can't help but to show those to you and hope that you reach out as well. And I will stop sharing the screen and open it up for questions. And just thanks for bearing with me. That once I get talking about my children, I just, I don't know how to stop. So I apologize for that being a little longer than I thought it was. But
no, it was fine. Thank you. Yeah. That was so interesting. So again, I want to encourage anyone who might have a question to go ahead and type it into the chat box, and we'll make sure that Janelle can see that. She and I will be the only ones who can see the questions during this. And while we wait to see if anyone has any questions, Janelle, I wanted to ask, so rabbits, the goats seem so very versatile. They seem like you can utilize them for their services that, as you were describing with the land, and also for their fiber. Rabbits, do they?
Rabbits, yeah, the
fiber or?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to make it clear that I'm not killing these animals. So you shear your goat about twice a year. The rabbits, you're usually brushing out as you go along the way. That's where the true Angora, when we talk about an Angora sweater, something like that, it's really not from mohair per se. It's from rabbits. So I cannot describe how soft that is. It's like the softest, they look like cotton balls, all you see is this mass of fluffy fur and just two eyes and ears, but the softest silk. I mean, it's just unbelievably soft. And so that you can mix this. You can mix the Gotland fleece in with whether it's the mohair or the Angora, the rabbits, or, so I'll be testing this out. Yes, I'm going to be the pusher in the playground, testing on all my knitting friends or my crafty friends and saying, will you try this blend out? Because even though I'm a hand stitcher and do embroidery, I didn't learn from my mom how to knit. I lost her a little too early to know how to do that, actually. But yeah, so you can, it's all in the mix. I've got a plan, and their byproducts. Rabbit scat is very, very nutritious for the earth. It's highly sought after by gardeners.
So you can let them kind of free roam within the penned off area, and they'll help out as well and fertilize?
Absolutely. I rotationally graze the rabbits as well.
Super. Again, if anyone is having difficulty figuring out where the chat section is, if you hover your mouse down at the bottom of your screen, the little chat box should pop up. We have a comment from Diane that says, great talk. Will it be available online? Yes, the Camden Public Library has a YouTube programs page. So if you go to YouTube and type in Camden Public Library programs, our channel comes up, and I'll be loading this talk up tomorrow or by tomorrow. And if you can't find it, just email me and I'm happy to send it. It's jpierce@librarycamden.org. We have a question from Brandon.
Yeah, oh, you can see that too. Okay,
Yes.
yeah. So Brandon from Colorado is asking, he said, he missed the beginning. Shame on you, Brandon. So sorry if this was covered. Are you having the goats clear the land to grow a food crop? Not, well, food for them, basically. But I've got so many weeds, Brandon. You would not believe it, how many weeds I have, actually. It's really kind of awful. But so currently what I'm doing is I will get them to clear those weeds. Now, I don't want it to be just dirt, because that means it'll take topsoil and all of that. So in order to keep those weeds at bay, I do need to plant something there. So I'm thinking that right now, at least, the best thing to plant once I get that under control will probably be clover, which will be great for both my sheep and for my rabbits. And the goats, they're what you would call, they're not grazers, they're browsers. So they're always looking for things a little higher up. And that's one of my dogs who's upset with me in the background because I'm not petting her. Yeah, so I don't plan on doing probably not like a standard food crop. You know, the way that you would think of maybe sowing corn or something like that. I have a feeling it would be a mixture of ryegrass and clover, because of the nutrition it provides the earth.
I think that I also received a question that was different from that one from Brandon. It says, where would you point someone that wants to learn more about soil and gardening for both food and plants?
So what I would do is Google regenerative agriculture practices. There's some great, you know, they're in Colorado for you, Brandon. Your extension program, you know, some of these land grant universities here for us in Oregon, it's Oregon State. For you, I can't remember whether it's Colorado State. I think it's probably Colorado State. But Google regenerative agriculture practices, and then a whole world is going to open up for you. And I should have provided a book list too, because I'm starting my library and really getting to know this. But it's amazing when you realize you can be a part of the solution yourself and do your own part in your own backyard. And and I happen to know Brandon, who's in real estate. So Brandon, you can be telling all your clients this, you know, because you're one of those people that has a lot of impact. So please, this is something that Colorado needs, obviously, because you do have those drier grasslands. And so in order to reduce your fire risk, this is important.
We have a question that came in from Susan that says, how long did you have your land before you added animals? And how long will it take for the land to be ready to plant after the animals are on it?
Yeah, so is this Susan Heckroth by chance?
I'm not sure, it just says Susan.
It might be, and if it is, hello, Susan. And if it's not, hello, Susan, anyway. And so so we closed on the house. I got home from Cowgirl Camp right after Labor Day. We had a contract on the house by September 11th, and we closed on the house by October 11th. Derek started moving into the house because he had a lot of deadlines at the time. So he was in here by October 15th. We only lived about 10 minutes away. And then we started moving instantly. And then we were out of the other place by November 1st. I built the fence, all the way through Christmas and into January. And then I just got the goats on Mother's Day. So they haven't been with me long. And so we are doing this together. I think, based on the number of goats that I want and the number of sheep that I want, I do need to leave room for babies. I don't want to max out at 15 instantly. I need room to grow so I can get the fiber I want and get the genetics that I want. So I will probably end up in my first generation with 6 goats and 6 sheep. Rabbits I can work with a little differently because they're small. I think it'll probably take me a couple of years. It's really, really thick. really thick. And I will keep the animals on this ground. And I've also identified resources. For example, now I have a really good friend that I work with who has a 100-acre orchard who can use sheep. You know, so if I run out of land, I don't want to overgraze, right? So he needs help taking care of the grass in between his trees, so his trees are not competing for water as they're growing. So that's another way this can be used in orchards or the wineries here in the Willamette Valley.
So the second part of that question was asking about how long would it take for the land to be ready before you could plant on it after the animals have been on it. I assume that would have to do with how aggressively you were letting an animal habitate within that particular spot.
It also depends on the weeds that I have too. So these blackberries, they're hard to get rid of. So I feel like, you know, we will try to knock down all these blackberries this year, but they're going to grow back for a couple seasons, you know, for a couple cycles. So the more that I can treat them, the more that is cleared where I can, you know, I do need to clear some of the Douglas fir canopy here because those are not native trees. Actually, they were brought here or allowed to grow here for timber purposes. So, and they're not doing well in the drought. So they are a fire risk themselves. So I need to thin those out. And that will open up, you know, the canopy or open up the canopy and really help the clover and grasses as we're moving along, and also help choke out the blackberries too. So it's all kind of very cyclical and has to work together.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I do have a nice thank you from Diane, and thanks for doing this. Andy had to jump off for another Zoom meeting, but he says, great job. And we'll have time for one last question. And it says, are the rabbits in separate areas from the goats? And how long do you think it will be before you have a giant Angora rabbit?
I think it might be a couple generations before I have finally my giant Angora. I am experimenting right now. I have some giant Flemish, 3 giant Flemish. I'm a little underwhelmed by them so far, but I have a beautiful, they're not nearly the size I thought. I mean, they're babies though, you know, but compared to the New Zealand giant, this New Zealand giant, well, I'll show you what he did to me the other day. That's the other thing that happens when you're a farmer. You're injured all the time. Like I got, you know, I've got a black eye from like last week. I've put a T-post through my, you know, never mind. I'm accident prone. Everybody knows. I mean, I'm just this way, you know, that's how I roll. But yeah, so the rabbits, it depends on when I'm grazing them. So right now they're in a different part of the greenery than the goats are. I want the goats to be working on the blackberries. I want the rabbits not to be working on the blackberries as much as I want them to be working on clover and on the other things that they like to eat, and just, they're mowing my lawn right now, basically. I also have to be careful because we do have a lot of raptors here. So I usually cover their pens with a fitted sheet. I'm very kind of old school about this. My mom would be upset because I am using one of her sheet sets, but sorry, Mom, I still have it though. It's being put to good use. And, you know, so I do keep them together at night because one of my goats is so mean that, and it's the matriarch of my flock. She's so mean. You know, I got a livestock guardian dog, but she scares my dog so badly. You know, I think that she'd stare down a bear if a bear came near, or one of the coyotes or one of the foxes. She'd take care of them in quick order. It's a good thing she has a nice head of hair because she would have met the meat locker a long time ago.
They all can't be.
Don't tell her I said that.
They all can't be little angels, unfortunately.
Yeah,
goats and children and dogs. Okay, well, that was wonderful, Janelle. Thank you so much. I really, really, truly enjoyed that. And we've had some lovely comments here, people mentioning how fascinating it was. And thank you so much for sharing. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Camden Public Library offers these kind of programs like once or twice a week, and you are all welcome to join us. You can just go to librarycamden.org, and we have an adults events calendar there. Click on there. You can read about everything we have going up. And also, if any of you are from the area and you're interested in helping support us, you can go to librarycamden.org/donate. We're coming to the end of our fiscal year right now, and we're hoping to raise a little bit more money to make our ends meet. So thank you again for all your support, for coming out here tonight. And thank you, Janelle. This was wonderful and so, so interesting and important. I really look forward to spreading the word about this talk more. So thank you, and have a great
Cynthia.
rest of your day. Bye.
Great to see everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.